With all of the focus centered around the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, there has been a renewed interest in how the late sex offender, who was once a teacher at New York City's prestigious Dalton School, accumulated his massive wealth and ended up in circles with high-profile figures and orchestrated a vast sex trafficking operation. Now, 2 investigations by the New York Times unpack Epstein's rise to prominence, including one on how the college dropout got so rich. In it, Epstein is described as, quote, a relentless scammer. He abused expense accounts, engineered inside deals, and demonstrated a remarkable knack for separating seemingly sophisticated investors and businessmen from their money. He started small, testing his tactics and seeing what he could get away with. The other reporting reveals the very close relationship between Epstein and President Trump, especially their time chasing women together, writing, quote, with other men, Mr. Epstein might discuss tax shelters, international affairs, or neuroscience. With Mr. Trump, he talked about sex. Joining us now are 2 of the New York Times investigative reporters behind those investigations.
I think, it goes all the way back. Like you said, it goes back to the 70s. And just he tried to almost test what he could get away with, and kind of went up a ladder in a way of trying to go big name after big name, showing off an affiliation with the Rockefellers, for example, David Rockefeller, and then trading that to trade it up and keeping it on his resume. Kind of one thing would lead to the next, and people would buy it. He had a type of charisma and a type of way with people that he could fool them. If you look at the rise, I think he operated more behind the scenes probably in the 70s and 80s for the most part. But he had some affiliations for sure. It's in the 90s, I think in the early 90s where you start to see it. He solidifies his connection with Leslie Wexner in that period, starts to see some real money coming into his accounts, and starts to get the property, the planes, the status symbols. So he was, and then sure, I think in our reporting you certainly see a trail of people that he kind of left behind that were, bitten by his scams and so, but nothing that ever, sort of did him in back then. He kind of kept rising.
First of all, playboys is a polite way to put it. These 2 men were chasing women and chasing sex all the time. That was the basis of their friendship. When they got on the phone, they talked about who they had sex with and where. They would trade modeling cards. They forged relationships with modeling agencies to get more access to women. And they threw parties at which certain women had made accusations of sexual assault and abuse. Now, that's separate from saying that Donald Trump was implicated in Epstein's crimes and his trafficking. But it's also a long way away from a purely wholesome relationship. Their shared hobby wasn't golf. It was pursuing women and getting laid.
Welcome back, guys. This topic is disturbing, but it is important to talk about it honestly and clearly. What stood out to me in this New York Times reporting is how Jeffrey Epstein was not someone mysterious genius, but someone who slowly tested limits and learned how to manipulate powerful systems and powerful people. According to the reporters, he started small, seeing what he could get away with, and when nothing happened, he kept pushing further. Over the time, he learned that if you attach yourself to famous names and respected institutions, people stop asking hard questions. That is how he built credibility without ever really earning it. One reporter described Epstein as a relentless scammer, and that word fits perfectly. He understood human weakness. He understood ego. He understood that wealthy and powerful people like to feel important, special, and admired. By placing himself close to the families like the Rockefellers and clients like Leslie Wexner and Leon Black, he created the image of legitimacy. Even when people sensed something was wrong, it did not stop his race. That tells us something uncomfortable about how our system works and how often red flags are ignored when money and status are involved. Another thing that really struck me was how Epstein's so-called charisma worked. People often imagine charisma as charm or worth, but here it was more like manipulation discussed as confidence. He knew how to talk to people above him, how to flatter them, how to make them feel smarter or more powerful. At the same time, when you watch old footage of him, many people say he looks creepy. That contrast is important. It shows that charisma does not mean goodness. Sometimes it just means someone knows how to wear the mask right. The most painful part of this story is how Epstein targeted young women. According to the reporting, he especially went after girls who had already experienced trauma or abuse. He offered them attention, kindness, money, and promises of career help. For someone vulnerable, that can feel like rescue. But it was not rescue, it was exploitation. Once he gained that trust, he abused them and then used his wealth and powerful connections to scare them into silence. Imagine being young, already hurt, and then being told directly or indirectly that reporting him could ruin your life. That fear is something many victims still live with today. The relationship between Epstein and Donald Trump is another part of this story that people react strongly to. The New York Times reporter was very clear about one thing: Trump was not accused or charged in Epstein's trafficking crimes. That matters and it should be stated clearly. But what the reporting does show is that Epstein and Trump had a close social relationship, and it was centered around women and sex. According to the reporter, they did not bond over businesses or ideas. They bond over partying, trading modeling cards, and chasing women. That details is uncomfortable, but it helps explain the nature of their connection. What makes this relationship especially troubling is the environment around it. Parties where sexually assault allegations later emerged. Connections focused on sex, a culture where women were treated like trophies or entertainment. Even if someone was not directly involved in crimes, being part of that environment raises serious moral questions. It shows how certain powerful social circles normalize behavior that would be unacceptable anywhere else. Another powerful point in this discussion is the ongoing fear that still sounds Epstein's network. Years later, people are still scared to talk. Some fear lawsuits, some fear harassment, and some fear death threats. The reporters said that even getting people to return calls is difficult because the topic itself is toxic. That should worry everyone. When truth becomes dangerous, it means accountability is still incomplete. One moment that really matters is the mention of Amaria Farmer. She reported Epstein for child pornography because back in the 1990s and was ignored. For years, her claims were doubted. Now, there is proof that an FBI reporter actually existed. That is not just vindication for her, it is an indictment of a system that failed to act when it had the chance. How many lives could have been protected if those warnings were taken seriously earlier? The journalists also made it clear that this story is not over. They believe there is much more to uncover about Epstein's finances. Money leaves trails even when people try to hide it. Understanding how his money moved through the financial system could reveal who helped him, who benefited, and who looked the other way. They also want to know more about other powerful men connected to Epstein, especially those whose faces are still redacted in related files. That scary raises obvious questions. For me, the biggest takeaway is not just about Epstein as an individual, but about the systems around him. He did not operate in isolation. He survived and thrived because institutions failed, powerful people protected themselves, and victims were ignored or silenced. This story forces us to ask who gets believed, who gets protected, and why. If we really want justice, it cannot it cannot stop at one man who is already dead. It has to include the networks, the enablers, and the culture that allowed abuse to hide in plain sight. Because if we only focus on Epstein, we miss the larger lesson. And that lesson is simple but uncomfortable. When power goes unchecked, truth is delayed, and silence becomes dangerous. The cycle will repeat unless people finally choose accountability over comfort. This story shows how power, money, and silence protected the wrong people for far long time. Epstein may be gone, but the fear, the unanswered questions, and the victim's pain are still here. This was my honest reaction to what the New York Times revealed. If you want more real, no filter reaction videos like this, subscribe to the channel and I will see you in the next video.